Let's say I want to build an abandoned city. There is no human activity left. Trees and plants are starting to take over the empty buildings and streets. Wildlife has moved back in, slowly covering up any signs that people were ever there. Modern infrastructure like subways, streetlights, and traffic signals have all stopped working. The entire town is transforming into an urban wasteland, a totally fucked up one. If there's no human activity in town, then the city I'm building wouldn't need any simulation. I guess this also gives my PC a break. Anyway, the first thing I need to do is get rid of the vehicles. I need those cars, but I don't want them driving around. And there's a mod that controls the traffic. Exactly what I need. Perfect. But it seems like it can't control the train traffic. There are still trains running around. I would say that knocking out the cars is pretty much half the job done. I don't complain too much about the trains. We'll have to leave it like that for now and figure it out later. And I also found there's another mod that makes buildings on fire. Why would anyone even need something like this? But let's go ahead and test it out. Set all these buildings on fire. Anyway, it looks like we're all set, and I'm grateful for what I found. Let's cut the chatter and get this build up and around. What's up everyone, Donkey D's here. Welcome you all to this brand new series. Today we're going to start building an abandoned city together. Truth be told, if you want to build, you gotta clear the field. We're starting from scratch to build an abandoned town. It sounds pretty cool somehow. But we do need to consider the city's transformation before start building anything. How did all of this happen? A city can't be abandoned overnight. Abandonment is a gradual process. People flee the city by car at that time, right? It must be total chaos during the evacuation, with roads blocked by crashed vehicles, explosions, or maybe even buildings collapsing. So this is where we're gonna start. A completely blocked highway exit with all the vehicles jammed together that no one can move. People have to get out and run, which is how most zombie games begin. Not sure if it's currently possible to customize Sims to walk like zombies, but if it is, we could really create a Walking Dead city. Until then, we set the background of this small town in a post-zombie or let's say post-disaster time period, maybe 1 year after all the humans gone. Anyway, back to the highway exit. A very small highway exit, of course. This is a typical interchange you'd find in a small town that you'd never bother to remember by name. And, when you get off the highway and find yourself in a town like this, it's just to fill up the tank. Maybe grab a quick bite at some diner. Or if it's late and you're too wiped to keep driving, you might just find a cheap motel to crash in for the night. Nothing fancy. Just the usual pit stop stuff. Anyway, speaking of how to make road layouts more realistic, I'm not an expert that could define what is realistic and what is not, but since there are people asking, so I share what I know. In my humble opinion, the first and most important thing is to avoid designing perfect roads. In reality, terrain and nearby buildings often prevent perfectly symmetrical designs. So, yeah, we don't really need to stress over making junctions perfectly even. In fact, sometimes when things are a little off balance, it actually ends up being more interesting. Like that little bit of imperfection could just make things more unique. Before we get to placing the vehicle props, I gotta set up some vegetation first. The plants around the highway should probably be pretty overgrown, right? After everything, no one has been around for a whole year. But, let's try it first before it go crazy. With the way the game is right now, deleting stuff is still kind of a pain, you know? So it's better to start with less and add more if we need to, because if we overdo it and have to remove things later, it'll be a real hassle. By just having plants might look kind of boring, so I'm thinking of throwing in a few rocks here and there. If needed, we can always use some of these rocks to block off traffic, you know? Just in case we want to redirect traffic or throw in a few obstacles. Okay, so now we've got to start placing the vehicles. And yeah, at the beginning, there's no way around it. We're gonna do it the hard way, placing each vehicle prop one by one. It's a pretty massive task if we were to do it all manually without any help. But luckily, we've got this copy-paste mod, which is gonna save us a ton of time and make the whole process a lot less painful. But before we get to that, we need to finish setting up this small section of traffic and tweak the colors a bit. Once we've got a little section of traffic set up, we can go ahead and copy that bit and then just paste it onto the other lanes. The nice part is that when we do that, the copied vehicles will automatically get random colors, so it doesn't look like we're just repeating the same thing over and over. And if we want, we can always go in and mess around with it a bit. Maybe take out a few cars here, add some there, just to mix it up and keep things from looking too samey. We don't need to worry about the height of these vehicles. They might be floating in the air for now, but when you use Move It to slightly adjust the road's height, the vehicles will automatically snap to the road. There are still some empty spots, so let's go ahead and get those all filled in. Now we gotta figure out how to give this scene a natural looking boundary, because let's be real, it can't just go on and on forever. I'm thinking throw in some ambulances and police cars to create a sort of roadblock, to block the view and give a logical reason for not having a ton of cars everywhere. So what we're doing here is pretty much just building one of those invisible walls, the kind we always talk about in the gaming industry. Back in the early days of gaming, things were pretty simple. We're talking 2D games, where the edge of the screen was basically the end of the world. As games moved into 3D, developers started using invisible walls more and more to keep players within certain areas. It was a quick and easy way to control where players could and couldn't go. But yeah, it was pretty obvious and kind of clunky when you ran into one. As time went on and games got more complex, developers started getting a bit more creative with how they limited player movement. They used things like steep cliffs you couldn't climb, deep water you couldn't cross, or broken bridges you couldn't walk over. It was still an invisible wall. For example, if you've got this roadblock up ahead, then you already know it's a dead end. Some games have even introduced dynamic barriers, or what you might call soft invisible walls. These are the ones that change depending on what you're doing in the game. Maybe an area opens up after you complete a mission, or there's a dangerous zone where you can go, but the enemies are super tough. So it's like a soft warning. It's like the game saying, you can go here, but it's gonna be rough. I think that's about what we're doing here. I hope I explained my thought process clearly. and hopefully it gives you some inspiration. In those end-of-the-world stories, overpasses often get loaded with a lot of meaning and end up being key scenes that crank up the feelings of despair, chaos, and tension. These bridges, which used to be just normal parts of city life, become way more noticeable when everything's gone to hell. They were once full of life, but now they're just broken down with abandoned cars. Kind of like silent reminders that the world as we knew it is over. The concept of using an overpass is great, but when I actually started placing the vehicles and props on the bridge and ramps, I realized that was not that easy. Due to the game's terrain detection, these props often sink below the surface. It's pretty challenging to position them accurately and quickly where they're supposed to be. Fortunately, we can still use Move It to get the job done, though it's not exactly the most enjoyable process. And there's one thing I should mention, the Anarchy Components tool. It allows you to quickly add or remove Anarchy and Elevation Lock components from applicable objects. In other words, it can lock the height of props so they won't suddenly sink into the ground or disappear. So the next thing we're going to focus on is arranging the scene on the bridge. It's mostly about those checkpoints, crashes, and, the usual chaos and mess you'd expect in a setup like this. So that's The Abandoned City, the new series. I just want to do this first episode as an introduction, and I really need you guys to jump in and let me know what you think. Like, how should we actually go about developing this abandoned town? What kind of backstory do we need here? You know, stuff like that. Maybe your ideas will shape the future of this wasteland. Anyway, In the next episode, we'll start building the things you'd expect near a highway exit, like gas stations, motels, parking lots, and whatsoever. I'm not exactly the kind of person who can build a huge, bustling city, but I'm super excited to see where we can take this whole abandoned world concept. So if you're into this series, don't forget to smash that like button and definitely leave me a comment with your thoughts. If there's anything specific you'd love to see in this world, or maybe you've got some cool ideas, let me know. I'm really excited to see what we come up with. So until next time, peace out.